Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. So excited to be with you today to talk about how Contentful and Netlify work together. This is going to be a really interesting webinar for us because, I work here with Netlify, and we see a lot of our customers are using Contentful and Netlify together. So we thought, who better to talk to about it than the Contentful web team themselves? I'm joined by two great guests here from Contentful. I'd like to welcome Moritz and Jani to the stage and kick us off with a quick introduction from everyone. This is, of course, an interactive session, so I'll ask the Contentful team a few questions, but we also have an audience Q&A that we'll get to at the end. So please feel free, as we're kind of talking about the stack and we're talking shop here, to ask your questions, and we'll get to those at the end. Great to have you all here.
Hey.
Hi.
Moritz, Jani, can you kick us off with a quick intro of yourselves and tell us more about your roles?
Sure. Maybe I can go first. So my name's Moritz, and I manage the team working on Contentful's marketing website. So everything you see under contentful.com is my team's domain. And if you don't know Contentful yet, we are the leading content platform for digital-first businesses. And I guess you'll find out some more about that in the upcoming minutes.
Cool. So, hey, my name is Jani. I manage the web developers within the marketing team. Currently 2 people strong in addition to myself.
Awesome. Cool. So, understood that you two are part of the web marketing team, but tell us more for the folks here on the line. Like, who else is involved in Contentful's web properties? Tell me more about kind of them and their teams and even their goals.
Maybe I can give it a shot. So we are obviously part of the marketing department, which isn't very small, I must say. Like, it's pretty big, actually. And we have quite a range of collaborators in that regard. So we have obviously people working on product marketing, content marketing, writing content for the blog, for example, writing or building landing pages in the campaigns team. We have people in customer marketing, developer relations, and such. So that's quite a huge team, and and everyone contributes their initiatives to make up that big picture that is the Contentful website, I would say.
Awesome. And then, understood that there's the main Contentful website. Are there any other web properties that your team focuses on? Any other maybe web initiatives?
Yeah, I don't think there's any that we as a team focus on. I think it's more of a company-wide effort. So I think a lot of the teams are already using Netlify or kind of moving towards using it more and more. So we, in addition to or marketing website properties, which are the production side, of course, but also staging and preview environments. I think maybe the biggest project right now is the Format 36 website, which is the open source component library from Contentful. And this is something that can be used to, build apps. For example, you can use the UI kit to work on that.
Very cool. Okay,
But
awesome.
there are teams using Contentful Netlify for a lot of campaign websites and smaller internal websites as well. So it's
Nice.
been pretty popular, I would say.
Nice. And thanks for giving us the preview on the stack there. So we already know Contentful and Netlify are being used, but tell
Right.
us more. What else goes into that stack?
Yeah, so we're basically using Gatsby. That's kind of our thing. We use it with the style components. So that kind of allows us to, develop stuff pretty quickly. And in addition, we also use Storybook to kind of have a preview of the components that we've built. And this is actually different from the, Format 36, which is more to do with the app and how that is being built. So it's not open source, unfortunately.
Got it. Okay. So, sounds like there's the one benefit of, with this Gatsby Contentful Netlify stack, speed of iteration. Any other benefits or any other drivers of that technology decision? that the Contentful team might note?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the ecosystem as a whole. There are a lot of plugins for Gatsby. Of course, you can get going pretty quickly, but also if you want to kind of poke under the hood a bit and develop your own plugins, for instance, I think it's pretty flexible in that regard. So, for example, I think the easiest way to get started with it is to probably download the like a starter kit for Contentful and Gatsby, and that gets you going pretty quickly. But if you want to do something more fancy, like I don't know, like we do sourcing of content in terms of like using multiple GraphQL endpoints, for example, I think it's pretty flexible for that purpose as well. But there are a lot of source plugins that you can plug into and connect to different services. So I would say that's like one major reason we went with it, I would say. But also, just the fact that the user experience tends to be very good because it kind of does a lot of optimizations upfront. So when you come on the website, you see things appear immediately, and that is obviously a huge thing for a company like us.
Absolutely. Okay. So some user experience benefit, looking at, they get started, also being kind of quick and easy there. So what does it look like, if someone at Contentful wants to get a new project spun up, a new website, what goes into that for your team?
Not much, actually. I think people usually just connect their GitHub repo and then just choose how to deploy it. I think a lot of people just use, the automatic deploys. So when you have changes go in, you get a new version of the site. But for us, we actually use a lot of webhooks and stuff like that. So that usually gets the builds going. But I think there are a lot of options. I mean, it could be something as simple as just, drag and drop. Basically, if someone wants to upload a static website without going through the hassle of, keeping it updated. So I've seen that happen also.
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah, I think, one of the main things that we see too is like lowering the barrier of entry, right, on getting sites spun up. So I do think that we would really want to spend some time speaking with our experts about like the Contentful to Netlify integration. This is super important for a lot of users that come to the Netlify platform. So, within Contentful, what does the kind of content editor workflow look like? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, maybe I can try to outline that. So in general, for context, we have, like, just as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of teams contributing to the website in terms of content, and a lot of people working on very different things. And the strength of using Contentful to drive contentful.com is that we have a very flexible content setup. Basically, we have structured content that we can reshuffle, reuse, etc. So that's very good, very flexible, very helpful in terms of using different outlets. But in terms of an editor making a quick change and having a preview of what they actually changed, that poses a challenge because our product itself is just for organizing content and it's not for previewing content. And so this is where Netlify comes into play, especially the app, the integration. So basically, an editor would go into Contentful, edit an entry, change text, add an image, whatever, and then the preview build gets automatically triggered, or you can use the integration to trigger it by just a simple click. And then you have a preview of what the user will see once you publish your content in a very short time. And that's basically how we apply that and how people benefit from having Netlify.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a super helpful overview. I do just want to, for the audience, let everyone know for questions. I noticed a few questions in the chat. If you put them in the Q&A, we'll get those answered at the end. So please feel free to contribute. Q&A is open. So thanks. The Moritz, Jani, super interesting, right? That the teams are different, right? You're working in different contentful spaces. So what would you say, the staging, the testing environments, you brought up that you might have different branches within Netlify. Do content editors update the main production site, or do they update stage or dev branches? What does that look like?
It's all of the above actually. So it really depends. Like everyone can just start a draft of a new content entry or edit something, and if they don't hit publish, it will eventually be built on Netlify, but in a preview environment. And once they publish, that content gets pushed to production as well. So we kind of by that trigger a production build and deploy the content live. So that's for regular content editing, and then maybe Jani can speak more to this. But then when we are talking about developing new features for the website, like working on the front end, actually, we also do have preview deploys based on GitHub branches, pull requests, etc., that the team works on internally. That's not so much a content issue, but more of a like bringing in different front end sets into the mix and into the preview.
Right. So essentially, we used Netlify GitHub integration, which kind of gives us a preview build pretty quickly, and we're able to get an URL there and share it within the team for feedback. And yeah, that's kind of the workflow, I would say.
Cool.
And
Yeah,
once we're ready, obviously we just merge and goes into staging immediately.
absolutely. And I think in a previous conversation, you'd let me know that you're not too worried about the production deploys, right? Since you can always roll everything back and not kind of worry if there's kind of breaking changes, right? So some good work.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, kind of like Facebook has the motto of break things, or how does it go? We kind of try not to do exactly that, but it's inevitable that things will break. That usually happens every now and then. Actually, I would say we had one incident today where we had to roll back quickly, and I really like the fact that in Netlify you can just roll back to an earlier deploy pretty quickly, and this allows us to kind of ship things with confidence. So if something breaks, it's not going to be broken very long.
Totally, yeah.
So
I hear this a lot, right? And from our side too, we want to empower the content editors and also developers to make changes and kind of do so in a way where there's no fear of, am I breaking? Am I kind of doing something I shouldn't hear? So awesome.
yeah.
Um, what kind of cool stuff would you say that the Contentful web team can do with this integration that might not be possible with like a simple templated page builder CMS approach?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, Contentful is kind of different in that it's a separate system. It's not really a CMS per se. So you have APIs where you can get your content. And I think this is very great for us because we don't really need to think in terms of like creating pages. We can kind of do sensible content models where content is easily found and maintained, and the how we pull it into pages that can be very different than what the actual content type would suggest. So I think this is pretty great. You're able to the content is very portable. You can use it elsewhere as well. So for instance, I mean, you can have a content type with certain types of content, and you can pull that content into different places very, very easily. And that's kind of a good benefit for us, I think, especially when we start thinking about, different groups of people, like, or target groups, so to speak, so we can kind of target content that is interesting to certain people. Say you have like a business persona or a developer persona or these kind of things. So I think it's pretty powerful in that respect.
Cool. Absolutely. So sounds like the different teams, and you have again disparate teams working on separate content, and you have some type of module set up. So with your Contentful Gatsby Netlify implementation, how do you bring those different teams together on the website? Can you tell us more about how you bring things together and make sure that the teams are working together in a cohesive way?
You mean technically?
Technically speaking, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, usually when you start a Contentful Gatsby website, you probably want to use you know, the source plugin that already exists, and that is really a good and fast way to get started, I would say. And it suits, I think, new websites very easily. The thing with our website is it's kind of grown into a very big repository of content. So obviously, when we want to build a new website, then kind of have to consider, do we want to pull in all the content or not? And when we have different teams maintaining different pieces of content or areas of the website, I think it's kind of sensible to use an approach where we pull in content from different spaces, and that really, I think it's really worked well for us. I mean, for one, we don't really need to worry too much about maintaining the content. We just worry about the presentation, more or less. And we're also trying to get more and more teams to actually contribute to the front end as well. So that's something we're not like exclusively owning at the moment, I would say.
Got
So
it.
yeah, I think it works pretty well. I mean, just enabling the teams to contribute, I think it's really great.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And also, maybe for context, for people who don't know our setup super well, it's important to say that we're building the website, pulling content from different spaces in Contentful. So there might be a help center that's powered by a different Contentful instant than the marketing website. But there's also completely autonomous apps that we kind of blend into the web experience, like pulling in our developer portal, which isn't connected to the main website, and making sure
Right.
that this is a cohesive user experience, and that's something we can also do very well with Netlify.
Right. So technically, that is again a bit different because we're talking about the different repository on GitHub, and they have their own Netlify site, which deploys on its own essentially. And we basically used a Splat redirect feature in Netlify, so we're able to mirror Netlify website in a certain URL, like a directory almost, and it will just mirror from the separate Netlify site. We found this is really nice actually for some areas where we have maybe a bit of an older implementation, but don't really want to put in the effort to actually redo it all at once. So it's a good interim solution, I would say, for many websites.
Awesome. Is there anything else that, for the folks here in the room, you would mention is kind of important on either the technical setup or even really the team workflow? Anything that you would want to highlight as really key in your kind of implementation of Contentful and Netlify?
Moritz, do you have any ideas?
No, I'm just like, maybe I could just reiterate, like, we're really happy to have such a tool, because like that's exactly like having quick previews for people contributing content to the website, for example, is essential for us to collaborate, because we can't be on standby for an organization of a couple of hundred people who constantly do something and make sure they have a preview for their content. So being aware that they just have to push the button, see the preview, and then do their job autonomously, while we work on the infrastructure, we work on extending the feature set, the user experience. That is incredibly helpful. And so the only time we basically hear from them is when we mess something up in the front end and the build doesn't go through or so. But it's usually really peace of mind setup wise.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. With Netlify, we call it atomic deploys, right? So, just seeing how the Contentful team can iterate all the time, essentially, right? And be, triggering builds through the webhooks just constantly.
Yeah.
That's really, I'd say, one of the powerful points. Cool. So a lot of the folks here are just thinking about this, right? Just starting out with, maybe Jamstack, or thinking about which CMS would be a good fit for them. So how would you say that new users should think about getting started with Contentful and Netlify?
I would say maybe the easiest way to get started is to look at some of the starters we have. So I know we have one for Gatsby, and then we have Next.js. That's pretty popular, I would say. And then I think we have others as well. So probably going to, I mean, you can kind of kick the charts around a bit if you download the starter and just, put that out there and see how it works. That's probably the best way, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And like as it's free to sign up for Contentful, it's really easy to just like sign up, create an account, use a starter pack, hook things up, and prototype some ideas to find your way around, and see whether it's the right approach for you.
Right.
So I'd say that's a very good thing. And then if you already have a Contentful property running, you can use extensions such as the Netlify app to generate previews right from the content editing experience.
Right.
And there's tons of other apps as well. We have quite a marketplace where you can download all these extensions and use for your projects.
Yeah,
Cool.
I forgot to mention you can find all the different technical starter kits probably under the developer pages. If you go there, you should
So
have
it's
like a
contentful.com/developers.
Yeah, there should be a pretty solid selection of technologies you can try if you don't want to do JavaScript. Also, there are others.
Cool. Okay. So I do have one more kind of planned question for the Contentful team here. But then, of course, audience, please do feel free to ask more in the Q&A. I think the Contentful team really should be a good place to get some of your questions answered. So, Moritz, Jani, now that you're here, right, and you have the content teams working in different Contentful modules, you have, deploys are basically constant. You've got the Forma 36, right, and the .com on Netlify. What would you say are the next steps that your team's going to take? Where are you going in the future?
I think there's a bunch of directions we're looking to explore. On a strategic level, I think the key point here is to really push forward even more on the topic of modularity. So we have a very flexible, very structured content system in place. And we want to make sure that the front end and the rest of the architecture reflects this. And we, for example, have invested quite some effort this year to allow editors, for example, to go to Contentful and build a very rich landing page experience based on some modules they can just like mix and match, shift around, and these kind of things. And working more on that is definitely the topic. And the next topic is looking into the future, like looking into things like Gatsby 4 maybe. But Jani can talk more about that in terms of enriching our current setup, which is a static site, obviously, to add some server-side rendering functionalities and capabilities. For example, to personalize the experience even more, even easier for users.
Yeah. So traditionally, I think the tricky thing with Jamstack websites is it's kind of hard to do any server-side stuff. So if you need to have A/B testing, for example, or personalization, it can be a bit tricky to do well. So we're really looking forward to trying out Gatsby 4 with the new features. And also, I mean, there's going to be server-side rendering, but they're also going to have this like long tail. I forget what it's called, but essentially you don't have to build all of your pages up front. You can kind of wait for the users to come in and they will be built in, at that moment. And this is something that's pretty interesting to us as a website with a lot of old content as well that's been, created over the years that might not be, visited on a daily or even a weekly basis. So I mean, that's one technical thing we're definitely looking forward to.
Very cool. Yeah, and for that kind of builds thing, we call that on-demand builders, right? So
Yeah.
basically to build
Okay.
part of the site, the top pages right at build time, the less frequented pages at the first request. Yeah, that's super powerful, right? And kind of expanding what's possible with Jamstack. Thank you both for kind of going through these questions and giving everyone here the overview of the stack and how your team works together. We're going to go ahead and jump into some audience Q&A now. So folks, you can upvote and downvote questions, and I'll go ahead and start out with the top question. So from the first audience question, we've got, what made you choose Gatsby? Are you focused on better performance or ease of use? Are there any other concerns that you would highlight?
Yeah, I think we briefly touched on that topic. I've been working at Contentful for 3 years now. I think the decision was made like slightly before I joined. I know I was going to be building with Gatsby because that's something I already had experience with and really love the developer experience. So for me, it was one of the reasons I wanted to get on board actually. And yeah, I think in general, just the user experience is really good. Pages load quickly, and as a developer at that time, I think it was maybe the most popular one. Popular static site generator written in JavaScript, and I'm really happy to see them, continue to actually work on the product and improve it over time. I think it's been really good to us.
Awesome. We have a very popular question here,
Oh, yeah.
which is from John. Thanks, John. Do you have any tips on keeping the content model backwards compatible? Do engineers manage the content model, or do content authors manage the content model, and engineers have more of a defensive Gatsby build? Tell us more.
I would say probably the developers usually create the content model, and then usually it's through feedback if we decide to actually revise content models. So we might do migrations programmatically, for instance, to kind of move into a different field type or things of that nature. So I think with Contentful we have pretty powerful tools to actually migrate content into different content types, or I mean content fields. So that's pretty great. I think there are also now there's one app actually written by a Contentful employee. I think it's called, is it called Revise? I think maybe.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. So with that tool you can also do migrations with an UI, and I found it's pretty impressive. You can just migrate a field into another kind of field if you like, or move data around different content types. So I think a lot of the times we might, like if we do a redesign of a section of the website, we might actually create a completely new content type and then kind of migrate the content differently, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this definitely, and maybe to add, like one thing that we look for in general, mentioned it earlier, is kind of modularity and portability. And so we have a lot of content models that are kind of nested or working with references of certain sets of data. So having like a defined structure for metadata, for example, that gets consumed by blog articles, but also used in landing pages, etc. And makes maintaining like a consistent and like modern model more easy, because you change the reference type and then the rest automatically kind of works. If
Right.
if you don't forget about the developer part. So editors can't just edit something and expect to not break the website. So we need to make sure that the website keeps running.
Yeah, I mean, especially when we talk about the technicalities of this, we actually use GraphQL. So there you kind of have to define each field very carefully that you actually want to get. And if there was a situation that an editor could actually rename a field, I mean, that could be kind of, I mean, I'm sure if that's very easily done, but still, I mean, the theory is that if they remove a field, for instance, I mean, the fields would break immediately. So we try not to allow that actually, and kind of keep it very tightly within the developers to make any changes to the content types.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for a good question, John. The next one here is more of a kind of term definition, but important for the folks who are kind of new to Jamstack, right? There's this idea of a build. So for the Contentful team, can you explain how you're triggering builds and what a build means for you with this stack?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about the build, it's mostly the building Gatsby on Netlify. That's what I'm talking about. But obviously, when you have a content delivery system such as Contentful, basically the content is separate from the website pretty tightly. So it's not like coupled as you would with old CMSs. So you don't really, I mean, the build kind of happens separately from actual publishing of content. So that's a bit different in context. I don't know if that answered this question,
Yeah.
but I hope so.
Maybe
Yeah.
super abstract. Like, so basically, at runtime, like whenever the build runs on Netlify, the content gets pulled through the Contentful API, passed on to Gatsby, who then compiles it into static HTML and delivers that via Netlify.
Yeah.
That's kind of the build we're talking about.
Yep.
So that's and for the folks who are new to the stack, that's really why we would pair Contentful with Netlify, right? So Contentful powers the content portions of the site, and then with webhooks, right, we've integrated with Contentful, and then when content editors are making changes, the build is being triggered with Netlify. So we're building the site and then deploying it to our CDN. That's the main part. And then, I'd encourage you to read a little bit more about Jamstack. That's really the key terminology here, right? Is that the architecture is decoupled. We have a split front end and back end, and the front end needs to get pre-rendered, pre-built, and deployed to the CDN. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so the next one from Rowan. Tips to decrease the build time on Netlify. So Roman, for this, there are actually quite a few support guides that I can drop. I can actually drop one here in the chat, but maybe for the Contentful team, if you have any tips that have you had any build optimization steps that you've taken that have been successful?
We've definitely played around with a few different options. Unfortunately, we have some plugins that are kind of not playing nicely with any of these. So it might work for a project a bit better because we're not using any build time improvements currently. Basically, there's the Gatsby plugin I think you can install on Netlify, and then that kind of does a lot of caching, and that should really speed up the builds quite a bit. And then there's the especially for Gatsby, there is the remove fingerprints plugin that basically, instead of generating these hashes for file names, in which case, all of the build files are actually new in the eyes of Netlify, you can kind of not do that. So everything gets built with the same file names, and you have less files to upload when you actually deploy. And that can be really useful, but also from a user perspective, so you only get new files delivered to you. So if your browser cache has something already existing, it will just use that instead. I think the CDN works pretty effectively there to kind of deliver only content that has changed since the last visit. So I think those two already get you pretty far, but obviously there might be other optimizations that can be done.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, I did drop the pro tips guide on build performance as well in the chat, so you have access to that. It names all of the ones that Jani mentioned, and that if you don't the team, there are a few others.
I think it covers these both approaches pretty well.
Awesome. So the next one is all about how to empower content teams without developer input. So we have someone asking, I built a website with Contentful and Gatsby to deliver to a client who has no in-house developer. How can we make sure that they're able to update the site without developer help?
So I would say that's not actually a big problem. So the development involvement is needed to set things up initially. But once the whole app is running, basically, and you have a content model, you have a front end to match, it's really about editing something in the CMS, adding something adding stuff in Contentful, and then the webhook will automatically trigger the Netlify deployment, and the page will just magically appear without any involvement. So developers are only needed to set things up or fix them if something breaks, but that is rarely the case if you don't have structural changes.
Yeah, I found most often it's the case of new features are requested or things of that sort. I think with Jamstack websites in general, it's not obviously security can be a thing, but if you have a very basic static website, I don't think you necessarily even need to keep the project dependencies up to date very often. So I think that can also remove some of the need for an in-house developer, I would say. So as long as things work, you don't really need a developer, and they shouldn't break too often. But if you have content issues or you want to do something extra, then I think it's a good thing to have at hand. Not necessarily in-house, but you can probably do that with outside resources as well.
Cool. Okay, thanks for that. So, the theme of this webinar series is scalability. We have a good question here about, you didn't talk much about scalability. Would you please explain how Contentful deals with scalability issues? It's a good one.
I think this is I think this could be a question more to the application team, maybe. But generally, we have pretty flexible setup. So we obviously have, normal cloud servers, and those get scaled pretty quickly when we have new users. And obviously, that also means when we have a lot of traffic, it scales with that. I would say it's been pretty impressive in that respect. But obviously, with static websites, which we're now mostly talking about, you kind of fetch the content upfront, so you don't even have to, request content very often. And when the site gets built, you don't really get any extra requests to the APIs when you deploy that. But overall, I think it's pretty impressive from what I've seen inside Contentful. I haven't really seen this kind of stuff before. I think it's pretty magical.
Yes, absolutely. And once the site is live, it's all in
Yeah.
Netlify's hands basically. And
Mhm.
this is also seems to work. We get quite some traffic and it didn't break down so far. So
Yeah.
scalable it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially if something gets shared on Slashdot or whatever, Hacker News or these kind of sites, we don't really see any effect, essentially.
Absolutely, folks. And thanks for that. I think, for folks who are thinking about Jamstack architecture, like scalability is really one of the main points, right? Because
Yeah.
by decoupling front end and back end, your front end becomes just so much more scalable, right? Netlify essentially handles all of the deployment, the hosting, right? We have a multi-cloud CDN that really scales to meet our customers' traffic. So essentially, I think it wasn't brought up that much because the web team here isn't too concerned about the site scaling to meet customer traffic. I think we did bring up a few good points around like scaling as a team and then setting up the different modules. So good input there, and thanks for the question. Cool. So we have one question asking, how long does it take for one full build in Netlify? How many static files? Maybe a ballpark estimate. It's always helpful for folks to have some reference point. So, you folks being the pros here on the Contentful marketing team, where do you typically see build times, and what's the size of the site you're deploying?
Right. So I think we're kind of averaging around 6 minutes these days, I think. And that's mainly due to the fact that we actually connect to a lot of sources. So we connect to places like Greenhouse, we connect to Marketo. We have about 5 or 6 Contentful spaces connected to it. So I think the sourcing of the content already takes a bit of time. And then we like I said earlier, we haven't really done any optimizations. So I think we could probably drop quite a bit of that time if we actually manage to do some optimizations. I think it would be much faster.
Yeah, but it's definitely fast enough for us, and it's been quite a bit faster than in the past. Like we've done some work in the past, and also have been looking into high performance builds, which helped a lot. Also, like parallelizing previews and these kind of things. We have like obviously people in marketing build stuff and have previews running, but also people outside of marketing work on the whole system, and it all goes pretty smoothly. But I can't say how many files we have in total. A lot.
Yeah, I don't know how
many.
many files we have when we deploy, but we have about, I think over 2,000 pages on the
Yes.
website. So we actually do not have any, or we have very few image files hosted in the repo. So we actually, reference them externally. So that kind of helps a bit. But again, you're not really going to be able to reuse or make like good use of the caching you have on Netlify. So I mean that's one downside of it also. Like you would normally get the images cached on Netlify, and then you wouldn't need to, get them all of the time, I think. But I remember the last time I tried some optimizations, I think it was around maybe half of the time. So it really cut down the build times quite a bit.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point too, at the scale that the Contentful team operates, like high performance build with Netlify, just increasing the compute power there, increasing the memory, right? And growing concurrency can help with those things as well. So great question. We have a couple of more. We have just around 1 more minute here. So I'll try and kind of go quickly through these last 3. Thanks for bringing up SSR. Does Gatsby deploy SSR? We thought it was only for static sites.
Yeah, I think starting from version 4, they will. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm really looking forward to giving it a try.
Cool. And then how does Contentful compare to Storyblocks? So how do you see folks using Contentful maybe instead of CMSs?
No, I haven't really tried Storyblock, so I don't know if I can answer that.
And obviously, the
Sorry.
Contentful has to be better because it's the greatest product, and we enjoy it a lot. But I don't have direct experience with Storyblock and can't speak to that in detail.
Okay. And I think today was all about hearing more about the Contentful and Netlify integration and kind of the work you folks have done there. So really appreciate the context that you've shared with us, and hopefully the community today came away with a few ideas on how they can get started with a similar setup. Folks, this is a recorded session, so we'll of course share a recording with you. But I do want to thank everyone for joining and thank our guests again for joining us and for a really kind of interesting discussion.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Take care, folks. Have a great rest of your day.
Ciao.
See you.